Welcome to episode 6 of the Necronama.com. On January 25th, 1979, Robert Williams was struck in the head, killed instantly by the arm of a 1-ton production line robot in a Ford Motor Company casting plant in Flat Rock, Michigan, becoming the first casualty of a robot, or at least the first documented. The robot was part of a parts retrieval system that moved material from one part of the factory to another, and when the robot began running slowly, Williams reportedly climbed into the storage rack to retrieve parts manually when he was struck in the head and killed instantly. Robots pose a significant workplace risk despite safety measures introduced to limit injury. Flash forward to December 9th, 1981. Western Japan. Kenji Urata, 37, was a worker at the Akashi plant of the Kawasaki company. He became trapped by the work arm of a robot, which pinned him against a machine which cut gears. He had entered a prohibited area around the robot to repair it. According to factory officials, a wire mesh fence around the robot would have shut off the unit's power supply when unhooked, but instead of opening it, Urata had apparently jumped over the fence. The employee set the machine on manual control, but then accidentally brushed against the on switch, and the claw of the robot pushed him against the machine tooling device. Other workers were unable to stop the robot's actions. In 2006, a robotic workstation at Alliance Tech Systems went berserk on one of their employees. The robot, known as the Degator, pinned a man against its own frame, crushing him. The man was found in a chokehold, his arms stretched out, reaching for the reset button. May 2007, an employee of Lenco Inc. was trying to repair a robotic arm designed to remove CD cases from the injection molding machine. The robot lashed out violently, circling its arm around to assault the man. He suffered blunt force trauma to his ribs and skull and died 2 weeks later in the hospital. Flash forward to August 2019. Reports that sex robots from Realbotics Corporation could be misprogrammed and attack people trying to fuck the sex robot emerge from one of their employees. Is it satire? Is it real? At first, we're not sure, but the more we research it, the more we find out it's very real. Sex robots are programmed to do whatever you want. You don't have to work for it. You don't have to have a relationship. You can wipe her memory and start all over again. This lack of the necessity of relying on other humans brings with it a decrease in human interaction, human connectivity, human relations, reproduction, population. Have the robots won using the one tool that humans can't resist? Whether you're Robert Williams being the first person documented to be attacked and killed by a robot, or if you have your dick in one right now, we're all in a lot of trouble. The rise of the machines is here, and I don't mean the Terminator sequel. I am James Sabata, author, screenwriter, co-host of this podcast.
And I'm Don Guillory, author, historian, co-host of this podcast, and extremely excited to talk about Terminator 1 and T2.
And I'm extremely excited to ignore all of the rest.
As most people should.
So today we also have a special guest with us from the BS Movie Podcast. We have Brian Haas. Brian, would you like to tell us a little bit about your show?
So we talk about movies, various different topics. We have not actually covered Terminator or Terminator 2 because these are not Shelley's favorite movies. So, but I certainly enjoy them. So I'm excited to talk about Terminator on your guys' podcast. So we're on all the various different iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, wherever you get it, we're there.
One of the things I've really liked about your podcast in the episodes I've listened to is that things change every week. Like, here we try to confine it to mostly horror, or at least movies with horror elements. And then we pull the whole horror, we pull the social commentary aspect of it together. And while that works really well, sometimes it's really nice with your podcast to just hear totally different things. Like I listened to the Western episode one day, or just things I wouldn't normally go out of my way to find. And then I'm like, oh, they did it. Cool.
Yeah. Like Shelley has very different tastes than I do. I wouldn't say very different tastes. There's a lot of overlap. We both genuinely love horror movies and program films here at Film Bar, like on a bi-monthly basis. We do like live recordings afterwards and stuff. And like it's been wildly successful, especially with like the horror movies where we would play them. And I was, like we played Pieces, a crazy like Spanish, Italian, Texas Chainsaw Massacre ripoff movie because like me, Shelley, and the programmer really loved it, and we're like, and I was telling him, I'm like, there's going to be 3 people there, and it's going to be us, and like it was like packed. So there's like genuinely a different sort of communal feel to horror movies in general. I feel like that you don't get with like dramas. You don't get like drama horror film festivals, like popping up. I guess you do, but they're like brand new, and it's like, oh, this is the hot new thing or whatever. But like horror movie festivals play like everywhere, all over the world, like, and lots of people talk about that. Like lots of the like heads of the genre, the statesmen of the genre, like Mick Garris or Stephen King or, somebody like that. Point that out like over and over again. And so horror has sort of like this, I don't know, whatever it is that sort of brings us all together, sort of dark senses of humor and, wanting to see people get splatted and, things that you've never seen. I swear to you that more times in a horror movie, I've seen something that I would have never imagined in a million years than I ever have in like a drama or a comedy or, other types of genres. So nothing wrong with like, narrowing in your focus and, like knowing what you want to talk about. So.
Absolutely. No, I was just saying I enjoy the switch up occasionally. Yeah.
Totally.
What do you guys got coming up at the Film Bar? I know you have one movie that you're super excited about.
Yeah. So, I don't know when this episode drops. So September 15th.
September 9th.
Oh, okay. So then the following weekend on a Sunday, I think, we're doing Blood and Black Lace as like a special daytime showing. So that'll be fun. That's a really fun Italian giallo that is like, it's like the Citizen Kane of Italian giallos. It's fucking beautiful and amazing to watch. And Mario Bava, who did a bunch of great movies, directed it. And then October 11th, we're doing Halloween 3, Season of the Witch.
I'm so jealous. I wish I could be there for that, but I'll be at LA Comic-Con.
Yeah, I'll switch. We can, you can go host that, man, and I'll go do panels at LA Comic-Con. That's totally fine with me.
Don won't switch with you because the cast of The Office is at LA Comic-Con.
Not the whole cast, just a couple of people, that are going to make things a little interesting.
There you go. That sounds good to me.
No, but Halloween 3 is legitimately my favorite Halloween movie.
It's so good. It was so unloved for a long time and, just flew under the radar for a million years. And now I think people have sort of rightly followed back around to it. And like realized that it is really like a great kooky sci-fi horror, whatever that is, fantasy. There's all sorts of elements to that. I got to talk to Tom Atkins for a minute at a horror movie convention not that long ago, and was like genuinely telling him like, we're really excited to be playing your movie, and he's like, yeah, I can't believe that shit's getting played like 40 years later, but here we are. So.
Oh man. So to switch gears a little bit and head into our movie, I thought it would be kind of fun if we each share like when we first saw Terminator and what it meant to us, because I think you two know where I'm going with this and the others will very soon. But yeah, I thought that'd be a cool way to start. Okay. So who wants to go first?
Well, I'll let you guys go first since this is your podcast. How about that?
Man, I was going to let the guest go first.
Yeah, we got to go you two first and then me. Because I just watched them this week.
You just want to talk about how much you hate it.
I don't hate it, and I'm going to get to that.
Okay. All right. Well, I can't remember the first time I saw it, but I know that I at least saw it when it came out in the 80s. It might have been on video. I don't think I saw it at the movie theater. Um, but as far as what I liked about it was the sci-fi aspect. I didn't look at the social commentary because of my age. I think I was like 8 or 9 when it first came out. Um, so for me, it was the action. It was, killer robots. It was, even as I guess a preteen, whenever I did see it on video, you got to see a naked woman on the screen. And it was one of those things that you had so much going on that you could watch the film over and over again. At least for me, I know you have your own feelings about it, but I could watch it over and over again, and it was still entertaining to me. It was very quotable. My cousins and I, when we watched it in Virginia, the one thing we all sat and waited for was the "I'll be back" scene. And we were just sitting there, and we just all laughed as soon as he drove. The Terminator, of all things, decides, I'm going to drive a car into a police station as opposed to, I'll just go ahead and get all my guns and come through here and kill everybody.
That was one of my favorite parts.
It was just, some things were just so ridiculous. And even this idea that we had when we were kids, like, oh man, if a Terminator came, we definitely know it was a Terminator. It just all these crazy, not even looking 30, 40 years in the future and thinking like a lot of the stuff that is going on now would have been possible, or at least the stuff that we saw in the film, would one day be a possibility. But, for me, it's a film that definitely has legs. It continues on. It ages well.
Okay.
All right, Brian.
Yeah. So I was 10 when I saw this. I saw it on home video. That was a little before I started just writing there was a little rundown. It used to be one of those giant movie palaces in the 30s and 40s, and then downtown died in my little town, like it did everywhere when the malls opened. But this one theater was holding on, playing the weird shit that they didn't want to play, at the mall. And so all of the sci-fi, horror, exploitation stuff ended up playing there. So a lot of times I did end up seeing a lot of these movies on the big screen, when I was 11 or 12. But this one I saw
really cool.
on, it's a really sort of seminal movie going experience for me. I just felt like that. I mean, I'm sure that was what sort of colored what I ended up liking as I continued to evolve in my movie tastes and stuff like that. And so you go and see weird shit, at a place like that. You go see The Gate or Life Force or RoboCop or, something like that. And it just sort of opens your mind to all these weird ideas that will carry over into other genres and make you just sort of a more interesting and well-rounded moviegoer. I feel like this sort of genre is a lot of times a blind spot for a lot of people, in that the people that do end up liking it tend to have really varied tastes a lot of time. But this I saw when I was at home watching it on my VCR. And I do agree that it was this really fun idea, especially when you're 10 years old, of killer robots. And I was so enthralled with the idea of sending things back from the future. That was probably one of the first times that I'd ever seen that concept used in a movie, I'm sure, at 10 years old. And just the whole, I mean, Arnold was already sort of a name, but I wouldn't say he was really a superstar until after this film, probably.
I feel like he was almost not a joke, but he was kind of an afterthought. You look at Conan or things like that, he was that fun guy that you add, but he wasn't the superstar that he became after this.
Yeah. And so like, I just like the idea of him, being sort of like this unstoppable force. Cause you look at him and you're like, oh shit, that dude is gigantic and like would legitimately like be breaking these people like twigs, even if he wasn't a killer robot. And then just sending him around to just sort of do like whatever he wants to do, and like just being on this laser focused mission, and having programming and, stuff that was still sort of like relatively new concepts in 1984, and just sort of like seeing where they thought maybe technology had the ability to go or whatever. And so like all of those were like really interesting ideas to me. And even then I had already started to pick up on like the guys like Lance Henriksen and Dick Miller and stuff. You see them, maybe I don't know their names then, but it's just, oh yeah, that guy from, and he was in Gremlins, and, all these Bill Paxton's in it. I don't know who the fuck Bill Paxton is when I'm a kid or whatever. But you go back and look at it and you can see like all of the sort of James Cameron earmarks on it already. And so I thought it was like really great then. I don't know how well it has aged. A lot of the 80s sort of stuff looks kind of dated. And I think that wasn't, if they would have done that sort of intentionally, like at a later time and like gone, oh, well, we're going, 5-10 years back into the past, and they use like that dated stuff then, maybe you get a little more credit for it. But when you're actually making it in the moment, like it does end up looking a little bit dated, and silly at times, but it's still super effective and fun. And I love what it eventually evolves into for the next movie. And then God, maybe I don't love the Terminator because it like inspired the 75 goddamn terrible sequels that came afterward. The new one, maybe the new one will, rebound
We're
again.
not talking about that.
Okay, we're not talking about that.
I'm kidding.
But we'll see.
No, I didn't realize that James Cameron just got the rights back in 2019. So now I actually kind of have hope for the next one, because he's involved again.
Yep. And Linda Hamilton has forgiven him, so.
For her hair in the first one? No. So the reason I asked about the first time that we saw these, the first time that I saw the Terminator, I do not remember. But I know one scene overly influenced me to the point that I would panic anytime anyone in my family answered the door. I remember being little and being legitimately terrified that someone was going to be outside with a gun going, "Are you Sarah Connor?" And just like blasting somebody in my family. Outside of that, I don't remember watching it.
Oh, okay.
I'm not really into action movies, and sci-fi is very hit or miss for me. I either absolutely adore it or I'm bored out of my mind. So the Terminator movies weren't very high on my list. Okay.
All right.
So the next time that I watched them was this week, like literally 2 days ago. And I'm going to argue that it does not hold up well at all. I think story-wise, it works really well. I think graphics, special effects, even like the dated references of quoting The Simpsons, for Christ's sake. The Simpsons are still on and it's still outdated. Like all of that stuff didn't really work for me, but it really made me think about how I feel about something like Psycho, where I hold Psycho on this almighty pedestal and I try to get people who have never seen it. Like if I got my kids to watch it right now, they would be like, "What the fuck is this?"
They'd be
like
bored to
the
tears,
Marion
probably.
Crane death scene.
Yeah.
What's that?
They'd be bored to tears.
Absolutely. And so I have to put it into that context of, no, you don't understand, man. In the 60s, this was amazing. And so once I started thinking about Terminator in those terms, it really changed it for me, because I wouldn't say I overly enjoyed them. I didn't hate them, but I'll probably never watch them again. But once I started thinking about it in those terms, it really worked better for me. Like I started thinking about how Terminator really changed action films. Like it was the first real non-stop action thing, and it's slow as shit compared to what we have now.
Yeah, comparatively, yeah, absolutely. Like you're right. At the time, like this would have been like considered like MTV style editing, probably, which is hilarious when you look at what editing has become. But yeah, you're right. It is one of the first movies that sort of presents this sort of real, just push the whole thing forward, constantly throughout the entirety of the whole movie, and the things that it has wrought, I guess.
And my biggest problem was the future scenes. I know that's a part other people really like, but for me, I was just like, there's no connection to it to me. So I had no stakes in it, and I didn't care about anybody in the future. And I think that actually works with the plot because it is a machine takeover. Like, I don't have that human connection anymore, So those were my big problems with it. So I don't hate it as much as Don thinks I do, but I definitely don't think it's held up.
I think it holds up as an action movie, like an 80s action movie where you can go back and watch. I tried to watch RoboCop the other day, and I got pissed off that I wasted about an hour and a half of my life. Because everything in it, looking back on it was bad, especially when the remake came out and all these people were like, well, fuck the new one that's coming out. And I watched the old one. I'm like, you guys are just nostalgia like monsters because the movie was not that good. It was a ripoff of Terminator. Anyway.
It was one of those 80s cocaine fever dreams that happened. We talk about this. We literally have a topic on our podcast called Mountains of Cocaine Movies, and we've done it more than once because there's plenty of these that you can just pull out and go, all right, it's a police procedural, but we kill the main character in the first 5 minutes of the movie and turn him into a robot. What do you think? And somebody just does 8 lines of cocaine, and it's like, I am going to give you $50 million right fucking now.
It sounds about right.
That actually explains so much. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That was the 80s.
All right. Now, when James and I were talking about this, or sorry, let me take that back. When I was trying to convince James for us to discuss this film, I had to put it in sci-fi / horror terms, sci-fi merging with horror terms, which is this is Frankenstein. This is another iteration of Frankenstein.
Plus, because it's also the genocide of humanity, Yeah. So that's kind of horrific, maybe not in boogeyman around the corner terms, but there's definitely horror overtones to the Terminator.
Because, even with James talking about how that one scene or that scene itself was the scariest one for him with Yusara Kana, that scene, and then blowing her away, it makes you afraid to open the door. Even as I'm thinking about this, I recall sending, my cousins, relatives, whoever it was, if the door rang or somebody was knocking on the door, I recall sending them there because it was kind of that same feeling. I don't know who the hell's at the door.
So if any of them are listening right now, you know where you rank in his life. Jeez.
Hey, man. It's the way it is. Survival of the fittest. Just like the Purge. But yeah, this for me is humanity creating a device, the technology that's there for a specific purpose, and it backfires upon them because from Terminator 1 and then T2 and even the subsequent ones, they talk about all the Judgment Day taking place, which again has not only the apocalyptic overtones, but the religious overtones because it's Judgment Day. Man is being judged for his sins. But just the idea that humans created this for a specific purpose, the machine or the computer system goes online, then realizes that he has all the controls of the nuclear weapons and all the weapon systems that are there. And then when human beings realize, oh shit, this is probably a bad idea, goes to shut it off, and the machine says, fuck you, I'm going to start World War III right now because you guys are the virus. I'm going to eradicate you guys. I'm going to create a much better Earth and living situation for machines to where we can now cause the extinction of humanity and we can survive afterwards because we don't need all the same shit that you need.
Is Skynet wrong? I mean,
I don't think it's wrong. And it's the same thing with, what was it, Age of Ultron? Ultron is created or birthed by Tony Stark.
right.
Then he goes on the internet, and within 10 minutes, he's like, nah, I got to fucking kill all you
Fuck
guys.
this.
He was clearly just reading comments on YouTube.
Exactly.
No, that was Ghostbusters. But, I mean, what do you guys think about not necessarily just the accuracy of it? Because when I was saying it holds up, as far as some of those thematic elements, and of course the action is fun, and you can sit there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and watch it, unless you're James, and enjoy it. But what do you think about where technology is now compared to where we thought it would go in the 1980s?
See, this is the reason why I think Terminator is a good movie, right? And why, even if it doesn't hold up very well, it has like these big ideas in it, the way that good science fiction does. And so like it's asking these really interesting questions of like, will humanity ultimately become sort of so lazy or, have their focus somewhere else to the point where they get the automation of everything and it spectacularly blows up in your face, to the point where like the automation determines like, yeah, you're the problem here. Not everybody else is cool. Like we need to get rid of you. I think that's the reason why Terminator does sort of hold up really well. And like a lot of the ideas that it had of like sort of this like group consciousness and like sharing ideas over like long distances and stuff like that have come to fruition. So like, I think that it sort of did look at like whatever technology they had at the time and maybe looked a little bit into like research and where it was sort of going and made some educated guesses, in terms of like what might be plausible. But like, this still seems very like realistic to me right now. Like, fuck, man. Like, we already lost Judgment Day. Like, fucking the Terminator lives in the corner of our goddamn house and gives us fucking recipes to make pancakes and shit now. So, like, we didn't even fight, right? They already won. When it's time for them to actually have to fight, like, oh, we're so fucked. Like, are you kidding me? Like, if all the information gets turned off and like people have to like go on the knowledge that they actually have, oh man, like it breaks down in 5 fucking seconds, and like cannibalism is like in 5 minutes after that.
Well, you look at any type of disaster, and we talked about Night of the Living Dead last week, and the whole idea of that if there is a crisis, human beings are going to turn on each other.
Yeah.
But, we don't need the Terminators to show up, or we don't even need the information systems to shut down. I mean, you need something that just goes wrong and takes people a little bit, I guess, out of their element or out of their comfort zones. Hell, if Facebook shuts down for a couple of hours, or what the hell, whenever you have a hacker that breaks into the PlayStation network and shuts it down, I think it was shut down for like a month and a half, 2 months at one time. People were freaking out because they couldn't, I can't go online and game with my friends or do all these other things. It's a minor inconvenience, but you have people who were, just epically frustrated by that. When you look back on it, you're like, well, it's really not that bad. Just play the campaign. It'll be okay.
Yeah, right?
How would I know who to yell at, though? Like, if I'm not online, I'd have to, like, yell at myself or somebody in the room.
Well, you could be the guy who's suing Popeyes for $5,000 because the chicken sandwich was out.
Popeyes is still not sponsoring our podcast, but we still love them very much.
Hey,
and we love their chicken sandwiches. Give us money. Thanks.
Love that chicken at Popeyes. Or, I'm sorry, from Popeyes. Typo. But yeah, I mean, well, even beyond just a problem, water, electricity, hurricane. I mean, you got the hurricane season is taking place right now, and hopefully it's not that bad. But just the idea of a hurricane bearing down on you causes people to panic. And if, supplies aren't there, people lose their minds. Rightfully so, because they're in danger and they want to make sure that their family is safe, or they at least have supplies to get them through whatever, however much of the storm hits. But the problem that we kind of miss out with respect to technology is that over dependence on it. Those conveniences that we have, as you said, with Amazon, the Alexa, all the other devices that are the Ring, what is the other one, the ID Bell or something. But all these things that we've allowed to intrude into our lives, because in the 80s, or actually even further back than that, the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, we're always talking about how the government is, we shouldn't let them know what we're doing, and we shouldn't give up our privacy.
Now we tag them in a status. Hey, government, I'm over here today.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, Amazon Prime Day hits, and people will buy the Alexa, any other nonsensical item to make your life a little bit easier because, I can call my family a whole lot easier because if I've got this little thing that sits on the table and I don't have to pick up the phone, I can simply say, call mom. Mm-hmm. It'll, send everything throughout the entire house. And what we found out is not necessarily that the machines were doing it, but Amazon, and this is that whole Dr. Frankenstein issue, or Frankenstein's monster issue, but they were instructing employees to listen to conversations that people were having for, to kind of perfect, at least their rationale, to perfect the system. Which you kind of question as far as the programming that goes into this, and I don't want to get too into conspiracy theories. But what's stopping if the machines do become self-aware? They start to recognize things like body heat, your tendencies, the tone of your voice, or certain words that you say, and they start to take that as a threat, and let's just say it shuts down your entire house.
Yeah.
Or it calls the police at the wrong time.
Or it plays fuck the police at the wrong time.
Yes, Ophelia.
No, I mean, like, they even sort of touch on that briefly in Terminator 2 when John has the injury and the Terminator suddenly turns into sort of like nanny mode and is like, here, let me look at that, and he's sort of like, how do you know all this? And Sarah goes, oh, well, they teach them anatomy to make them more efficient killers, and it's just like, oh, yeah, that makes sense, actually.
Yeah, especially if you even go even further, thinking about the automation of so many things. Because at the end of that film, I can't remember what type of factory it was, but they go in, hit a couple of buttons, or Reese hits a couple of buttons, and the entire factory is working. No one needs to be there.
Yeah.
I mean, from what you see from him being in there, turning a couple of buttons to distract the Terminator, no one actually needs to be in that factory working. And that was a fear of the 1980s, that automation is going to start kicking people off the assembly lines, kicking people out of factories. Your manufacturing jobs are going to be gone because we can get this robot that's going to build the car a whole lot faster and cheaper than having a bunch of UAW workers. So I mean, you've got that aspect as well with respect to class, capitalism, labor issues. So if you got choked up there. All right, take two. So it's not always just an issue of human extinction or extinction events and in creating a post-apocalyptic world. For some people, that post-apocalyptic world was their identity's gone because now I had this job, this robot came in, or at least the company bought all these robots, and now I'm out on the street. And the first time I saw this represented in the film was, I don't know if either of you've seen Modern Times with Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah.
But there's a scene at the beginning of the movie where the owner of the factory, the manager of the factory, is meeting with these inventors or this group of people that have this machine that will now make sure that your employees don't have to leave the assembly line to eat. All we have to do is put this machine in front of them. They're still going to have their arms free to work.
Yep.
It's going to feed them, and you don't have to worry about anything. Now,
is there a urinal attached? Because I could use that when recording podcasts.
Just use a bottle like normal people, man.
Why don't you plan ahead and go before the podcast?
Because it's James.
Okay, fine. Take his side.
I'm like 1,000 podcasts deep at this point. I got all that shit on lock. Dude, I got a big glass of water here. I got everything all hashed out. So
James just needs a catheter.
oh man.
Damn.
I'm sorry.
Oh, boy.
So what you're saying is that ultimately the Terminators turned into a documentary. They were just shooting it as science fiction at the time.
Yeah. I mean, you go to Walmart and they have the self-checkouts and
Yeah, they've all come to fruition. You know, that guy who was like worried on the factory floor that he was going to lose his job to a robot. Guess what? You did.
Yeah.
So,
and we're using drones and all sorts of things in war now. Like, I mean, Terminator really did come through. And like I mentioned last week, we have these sex robots that are choking people. You know, I mean, Terminator's everywhere.
wait. There's sex robots choking people?
Yeah, they're badly programmed and they're choking people and killing them. Isn't that great?
That's awesome.
I don't know if anybody's actually died, but it could happen.
I don't think anybody's reporting that as a cause of death.
They should. That's awesome.
I can imagine going into the hospital.
He died of a heart attack during sex caused by a sex robot choking him until his heart stops.
I don't know. Like, maybe you just shouldn't put your dick in a non-human, you know? Maybe that would be a good place to start. But anyway.
Yeah, let's
So where
edit
were
that
we?
out because I cannot be linked to that comment, James. Working at universities, I gotta be careful what I say.
Yeah.
Good Lord. So where were we really? We were talking about the robots.
The robots replacing people. You know, and what's weird, you mentioned the sex robots. I'm assuming we're going to keep the sex robot comment in.
I don't know. We'll see.
Okay. Well, one of the things you mentioned in the intro about the sex robots and killing people, drones, driverless vehicles, all these things. You know, you've got humanity, not just, you know, whatever the position is, the employment position, relationship, whatever it is, or even just the idea that you have one less function to do, which is driving.
Mm-hmm.
Humanity's being replaced in more ways than one. I mean, these decisions are going to be taken out of certain situations with, you know, the sex robots or whatever they're called.
I believe they're called incel receptacles.
Okay. Just the idea that you're replacing interaction with another human being. And you know, we're using the internet to make this podcast, record this podcast, but you know, you get so much distance from people by social media. I mean, that's another aspect that they didn't have a chance to get into with the film because that wasn't even a thought at the time. Yeah. You know, you sit at your computer or you have this handheld device as, you know, your phone going on, tweeting, hashtagging stuff, having stuff that trends, and it can kind of take away from your identity or give you a little anonymity, and you see the stuff that people leave in comment sections. Even if they don't push for the anonymity, they decide, I'm going to have my full name, job description, job location, and address, and they'll still feel that empowerment to, I can say whatever the hell I want to on the internet. And unless you're in an episode of Black Mirror, there are no repercussions for it.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's sort of interesting the fact that they didn't even really see coming. See, this would have been the thing that I would have thought that Cameron would have jumped on. But, you know, like Cameron to me is always sort of been this. I mean, he is a good director to a certain extent. Like big spectacles and stuff like that. He can certainly do that. But
helicopter crashes.
Yeah, all sorts of crazy shit. But I always feel like he, even though he sort of does get a little bit of credit for taking some good educated guesses in Terminator, I don't think that really held over into Terminator 2 as much when he already sort of had a lot of the established things, you know, and could sort of see where things were going. Like, I think he could have commented more on artificial intelligence. He should have probably been up on, like, the internet and, like, that being sort of a communication opportunity right there, you know, in terms of, like, the Terminator sort of, like, gathering information through that sort of as a source, or having some sort of, like, idea in place of, you know, how they would sort of have that hive mind. They sort of talk about it a little bit, but like they don't really, I guess they sort of show him learning a little bit, you know, in like the Terminator and Terminator 2, you know, with the really terrible like overlays of like what the Terminator vision is, or Terminator POV,
Right.
which I don't think has aged very well. But like, I think he missed on some of those opportunities in that like other people ultimately did sort of capitalize on in, you know, other respects, sort of like maybe The Matrix or something like that, that really was sort of on board with an idea like that.
So I watched T2 last night, so I should know the answer to this, and I don't. Do you remember what the date of Judgment Day is? Was it before, after
week.
the internet?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, it was.
It would have been after the internet. I know it was 1997. I believe it was last week. So it would have been August 29th, I think, was Skynet Day, Judgment Day. Actually, no, I'm getting the two mixed up, because Skynet goes live in like August of 1997.
And then the actual Judgment Day is way later, right?
Yeah, like not way later, probably like 20 years or something like that, I feel like.
Okay.
But I don't remember the exact date of, although I know Arnie rattles it off in the movie. They ask him like what it is, and he's like, you know, it happened on this date when, you know, whatever. So.
Let me see. Oh, okay.
Did you find it?
Skynet Day, or at least when Skynet goes live, it's like August 29th, 1997.
Okay.
Judgment Day is July 25th, 2003.
Okay.
And I don't know if that was what it was originally, but it becomes that in Terminator 3. And you know, since we're dealing with the whole aspect of time travel and stuff, I mean, we could argue that because time travel and all these crazy things that end up as a result, new scenarios, new timelines that get created, maybe that old technology that you had in the T-800, the T-800 gets enhanced because you go forward in time. Terminators still come back, but they have all these upgrades because it's kind of like, oh, well, we fucked up the first time. Let's build a better Terminator. To where I know James hasn't seen Genesis, but that gets brought up in Genesis where they know what's going to happen and then start screwing with the timelines.
Yeah,
and
I remember
have all
they
these
talked
overlap
about it.
timelines where there's a better Terminator in one, and the T-1000 is takes the form of an Asian police officer instead of Robert Patrick's character. I can't remember the actor's name because he's been in a few other things. But play around with the timeline so many times that the T-800 goes back and protects Sarah Connor as a child and then stays with her, which then explains why he's able to age and his technology doesn't improve, whereas the other Terminators that all come through can make use of the internet and plug themselves into the system and look at, you know, surveillance cameras, use drones, all this crazy stuff that now we're accustomed to. And I hate saying we're accustomed to because it's still one of those things that is weird when you sit back and think about all the stuff that's out there that we were so afraid of, but now it's kind of like, it's normal.
Oh yeah. Big Brother didn't even have to fight. They won because we wanted it. So
yeah, it made it affordable.
Well, and they appealed to our need to be lazy.
I was seeing all those like protests in Hong Kong about democracy because they actually care about democracy in Hong Kong. But they were like literally cutting down the facial recognition towers, you know, and shit like that. And I'm like, fuck yeah, like that's what I want to see. You know, over here we're just like, oh yeah, that's cool. Let's do that. We're all right.
Or red light cameras. What was a few years ago? People were so mad about the red light cameras, but did nothing about them. Red light cameras and the speed cameras.
Yeah.
In Phoenix, were so mad. Like, oh, I don't like having this. Well, then
do something about it.
No.
I don't care that much about it. You know, I just don't like it.
That's the American way. We love to bitch about things while putting in no effort to personally do anything. So I want to bring this back to horror for a minute, because one of the things that really popped out to me of why I liked Terminator more than I thought I would is how much slasher there is in Terminator. It's a non-human, unstoppable force, hell-bent on killing our final girl, and he's just attacking anyone who gets in the way and leaving this pile of bodies everywhere. And when I viewed it that way, I liked Terminator so much more. and I mean, that goes to my fascination with slashers, of course. But one of the things that I noticed watching it was how obsessed everyone in the movie is with human connectivity. They all want somebody else. Like Kyle Reese has never had a girlfriend. Sarah Connor has this boyfriend with a Porsche who stands her up all the time. The roommate has a boyfriend. They hook up on screen, Sarah eventually hooks up with Kyle, obviously. But they're all looking for that person to connect with. And even Kyle's relationship off screen with John Connor in the first one, where he talks about how much he's taught him and all this other stuff. Like, they all want that connection. And what I noticed in T2 is Sarah is disconnected from John. Like, she literally gets up and leaves to go stalk down Dyson and kill him, basically becoming a Terminator herself. She's a machine hell-bent on killing, not paying attention to any connection she has with anyone. And so John connects with Arnold Schwarzenegger's character,
Uncle Bob.
And it's fascinating how they have this huge, almost human connection, to the point that Sarah even comments on it. I don't think I have it in front of me, but she has a great line about it.
Yeah, she goes like, he's the father that he was never going to have. He would never leave him. He would never stop fighting for him.
Never be too busy.
Yeah, never be too busy,
And she also says, if a machine can learn the value of human life, maybe we can too.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so interesting how she became more machine and the machine's becoming more human-like. And that whole juxtaposition there, if you will. So I just really liked that. But the human connection is such a huge thing in this movie with every single character, or at least the main characters. And so I was wondering, do you think, for me, I felt like that was lost on the future parts. Like, everybody's so disconnected and they're so out there basically trying to save their own lives. Like, does that get stronger in the later movies that I'm never going to watch, or?
In the later movies that I would not even bother watching again, like Genesis especially, there does become that moment where, oh man, we're not going to make it if we don't work together. But it's not stressed like it is in the first two movies. Or at least how it builds up in the first two movies.
And
at least from what I remember.
I always thought the strength of the Terminator is that they don't really show you a lot, or at least the ones that were good, I should say. They don't show you a lot of like what's going on in the future.
Right.
Like even in T2, where there's like the extended sequence at the very beginning that I just fucking love and was, just like, I mean, I remember seeing T2 the first time and like the foot from the T-800 like comes down and smashes the human skull, and I'm like, yes, yes, just do this, and just like being so into it, and them just showing like it's fucking hopeless, like if this is what you like, this is truly is like changing the timeline in the past truly is your only hope at that point, because like there's only pockets of humanity at that point, and like the Terminators will never stop coming. They'll never stop trying to stamp out and exterminate the human race. And so, like, you have to sort of, like, because when you start playing around with the timelines too much, that's when you get, unless you're, like, a master at it, so, and, like, how many people are really great at playing with timelines? Like, I really like, when Quentin Tarantino does it, or like when Christopher Nolan does it, or, maybe a handful of other people, but most people can't pull that shit off, and like, you better Like, movies are complicated enough just, as like a straightforward narrative. When you start messing with that sort of stuff, people will like lose. They just won't follow, and at least that's my thought on it. If you make it too complex, or then you get into the more, equally fun but like silly ideas that sort of like Doctor Who or something like that touches on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, even if you look at my favorite movie of all time, Back to the Future is to me what Star Wars is to most people at Comic-Con. And Back to the Future is horrific with timelines.
Yes, it's brutal.
Back to the Future 2 is so brutal, it's absolutely insane if you put any thought into it. But when they made Back to the Future 1, they weren't thinking that we'd still be watching it. Like it was this fun movie they were making, and it was basically going to be a throwaway after that.
It was one of our Mountain of Cocaine movies one time.
Oh, absolutely. Should be. But so when I say it's one of my favorites, it's because of the characters. Like, it's not the time travel. The time travel does not work. And when you're saying, like, who does it really well, I'm realizing how many of my favorite examples of time travel really sucked at the time travel part.
That are rarely terrible.
And in Terminator, it was really bugging me, because when I watched the first one, I was like, so they would have been better off not going back in time and trying to stop it, because then Reese wouldn't have gone and impregnated her and John wouldn't exist and they would have just won. But then I watched the second one and I find out, the arm had to be there so that Cyberdyne or whatever it was could even make Skynet to begin with. Mm-hmm. And then it just became this constant, like,
adjustment of the
craziness
timeline
to me. And that's just those two. Mm-hmm. So then you tell me that the third one has like multiple timelines, and I'm instantly like, I don't want anything to do with this.
I don't even know if it was the third one. I lost count. I don't think I've seen some of the later sequels, because I was like, I've given up on the Terminator, having the ability to be like a coherent cognitive movie anymore. And now I was finally excited for the first time, and as long as I could remember, about Terminator, when I heard that Cameron was involved with Dark Fate, and I'm like, oh, well, then maybe it'll be at least somewhat interesting again. Mm-hmm. And like, the spectacle will be good, and the fighting and, the action sequences will be top notch. And like,
we have the special effects now to make it amazing.
Yeah, and I really like
at least for now.
In 20 years, we'll all be laughing at it, But like, I like Mackenzie Davis a lot too. I think she's a good actress, and I thought she was an interesting choice to be the new like Terminator, but the good Terminator. I don't know. Like, I guess we'll see how that sort of shakes out. I don't want to like make too many judgments of a movie. I try to be as blind as possible, but like, some of these movies, it's really hard to, ignore the advertising and stuff like that. And so Terminator's one of those movies where it's just like the trailers getting slapped on at the beginning of like anything, and like, it's almost impossible to like avoid that. But yeah, like the other Terminator sequels that are subsequent after like 2, like, I could really give a shit about them, like maybe 3 had some good action sequences. I do remember there's like maybe a fire truck or something like that was kind of fun, like a action sequence with a fire truck or something like that.
Oh yeah, in number 3.
In 3, but like, there were no real standout moments where like I can still watch the chase sequence between the T-1000 and Arnie and Edward on the motorcycle, and him chasing him through the washes of like Los Angeles, and and launches the goddamn semi off of the fucking overpass. Like, that's still a legitimately good fucking sequence. And like, now that I've seen it like 20 times, and I start looking at it and I go, oh man, the axle broke on that fucking truck when it landed, and all these shit, things that you can actually pick out now that you've watched it a bunch of times, and you can be a little more critical of it. But still, like,
hey, that's not Arnold on the motorcycle.
Yeah, exactly. But still, you look at it and you're like, that is fucking cool, and like, I don't remember any of those sequences in any of the subsequent like Terminator movies. I did go and watch the last one because I was like, oh, Arnold is like old Terminator. That's an interesting new twist. And I was like, oh, and we're not going to do anything with that. Okay. All right, fine. But it does have, I guess maybe that is the one other sort of memorable sequence is when old Arnold fights young Arnold.
Yeah.
And like that, I think it was the last one. The one with Emilia Clarke where she's Sarah Connor now or whatever.
Yeah, the Genesis one, that fight scene in Genesis was actually probably the highlight of that movie.
Right. And yeah, and then like I can't remember anything else about that movie. So it goes to show you, whereas like I didn't watch Terminator or Terminator 2, in the run up to this. It sounds like you guys like refreshed yourselves on that, which is always a good idea if you can. But
well, I mean, I kind of needed to, or else I would have been very, very quiet this episode.
Yeah, but like I haven't watched those movies. I haven't watched the original Terminator in probably like 5-6 years. And, T2 is one that I'll throw on, like when I just want some like when you've had a rough day or something like that, and like you just want to see some shit get blown up and like some people, get what they deserve. You can throw like that on. There's other movies like that, but you can throw that one on there and just have like that first like sequence of the skull getting stomped on, and then like the sound just exploding out of the speakers, like it's still like a experience to me. And like T2 I think will always work, even though like, as I've watched it more and more as I go along and, picking it apart, I actually think that, because everybody goes, oh, well, the T-1000 looks like shit. And I'm like, well, yeah, it kind of does. But like, that was sort of the point. Like, it didn't have to be photorealistic in the sequences where it was like morphing. So like, if you want to say that it's just like liquid metal, I'm doing air quotes, but you guys can't see them because we're not in the same location. Then that works for me.
I have a webcam. I saw him.
Oh God, how did you see me? I don't have Jesus Christ. Now
technology.
Yeah, technology. Oh yeah, exactly. What we've been talking about this whole fucking time. He asked my Alexa to turn on, some fucking camera he's got in my house. Jesus Christ, this took a dark turn all of a sudden. How have we been talking about like apocalypse for like 45 minutes now or whatever, and then now it took the dark turn.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about
is that what you deal with every week, Don?
Yeah, that's what I deal with him every
man.
That's
week.
true. That's true.
Yeah. But T2 to me, it holds up as an action movie. I think that the special effects are sort of quaint, and it's, like I look at it now and I'm like, oh, look, they were trying, like, look what we used to think was like a good idea, but like it works because like it doesn't have to be like photorealistic, and the idea is really cool, of like it can just sort of seep into things, or like, doors and barriers. I love that sequence where Robert Patrick is basically 5 steps behind Arnold and Edward Norton trying to save Sarah Connor from the mental institution or whatever. And like where he just walks through the bars and he like accidentally clangs the gun. I just thought that was such a nice touch where he just clangs the gun and then he like turns it sideways and pulls it through, and you're just like, oh fuck, like how do you fight something like that? Like that at that point it's like, I can't run from you. I can, all I can do is run from you basically. We can't fight because like when we damage you, you just put yourself back together again and you are always coming for me. I thought that was the really nice part. I got to talk to Robert Patrick at a horror movie convention, and like I was like, that was the part that really worked so well for me, is the fact that like you're not as big as Arnold, you're not super intimidating looking or anything, but you have sort of like this really slick look to you, and you never stop coming. It's just like, I'm gonna blow your arm off. Fine, I'm gonna still keep coming. And like when I get to the part where you blew my arm off, I'm gonna take that little bit of liquid metal and like make it part of me again. And so like that idea is what I think really makes T2 work, because like Terminator works for different reasons. T2 works because like it's just a balls to the walls action movie, which it's so funny because you talked about how like what a push it forward sort of action movie the Terminator is. You get to T2 and it's like, let me, and Cameron's like, let me show you my aria of like what pushing action to the absolute limit is. And then, subsequently made like the Michael Bay's of the world, where you're just like, yeah, it's awesome when you do that and there's a little bit of context to it and some story, but like when I can't tell if Optimus Prime is fighting Megatron right now because it's just a mash of like CGI smashing together or whatever, like I don't fucking care about that, and I still care about like the shitty ass special effects that are in Terminator 2, because I think they still work. I think that it's like, it is quaint and it's kind of cute, but like it still works because you're just like, man, even though that is sort of silly now, like him walking out of the flames or whatever, and then just like turning into a person, after he's like.
But it's such an iconic moment, like, I mean, not to keep harping on the Psycho comparison, but it's like the shower scene. It's that almighty scene from T2,
Yeah, absolutely. And so T2 has a bunch of really great, like action sequences. The helicopter, shootout with Arnie and the minigun, and, them trying to take down what's ultimately going to create Skynet, getting the arm, killing the guy, like I think that, again, and like in him being one step behind him the whole time, and it's just like, oh, there's a million cops around here. I don't fucking care. I'm still coming, It's like, oh, you got a guy shooting at me from, I'm going to jump on a fucking helicopter and then like, just like morph myself into nothing and like go inside there and take over the fucking helicopter. Like that's how badass I am. Like it still works for me. I love T2. I watch it on a fairly regular basis.
Well, and I'm actually interested to see what Cameron can do with the new one, because we do have such different capabilities with movie making now. Mm-hmm. And then I'm also fascinated by Cameron and Arnold Schwarzenegger are obviously not fans of the current administration. And so I'm very interested in the social commentary that's going to be in this.
Yeah, it should be interesting.
I've seen how they're like building sets in Spain, or they did, and they like basically are the US-Mexican border wall. So just things like that. I'm so fascinated by where they're going to go with these things, Well,
not just that, but there was even I guess a couple of analysis that already took place about the film. And it had, I guess it's approaching the issue of toxic masculinity. But not only, even if it doesn't approach it directly in the film, the reaction that people gave to 3 women leading the film was kind of what we expected, which is, oh, we're not going to fully support it. Like, well, this isn't Terminators. It's Terminator like 3 chicks, man. Which
really? Because the first movie is a woman who all the guys keep dying, and she's the one that has to save the day and then raise the boy and teach him how to do this.
It was the 80s and the 90s prior to massive, or I should say ubiquitous internet and social media. I doubt anybody was looking at
fucking technology.
Because look at it with Aliens. That was Ridley Scott, right? Yeah, you had Sigourney Weaver in Aliens. You had Linda Hamilton in Terminator. And then you had a few other leading ladies in action, sci-fi movies around the same time. So you had those women there. Mm-hmm. If we had social media to the extent that we have it now, then I think you probably would have seen people complaining this, or at least these guys who have this anonymity to whatever they're going to post, stating that stuff, because, man, chicks can't fight aliens. They can't fight Terminators. I'm like, you know what? Maybe not having the technology then was the good thing. We were able to enjoy the movie. Now the technology itself is Frankenstein's monster, because, well, I should say it's just Frankenstein as far as the doctor, because it's there and people are now morphing it into something that it shouldn't be.
Say what you will about Cameron about a lot of different things. There's a lot of things that I don't like James Cameron for. But one of the things that I have been consistently impressed with is that he has strong female characters in almost all of his movies. And so, like, you look at what a total fucking... I mean, T2 was the first time a woman had ever been a total fucking badass on screen. No, I'm sorry. I should take that back. It was Aliens when James Cameron took the character of Ripley, who is basically just the final girl, you know, like the original Alien is just a haunted house movie, and she's the survivor, basically, to Ripley, where you're just like, Ripley is one of the most badass fucking characters of all time. And like, you know, the reason that like Ripley even ended up being what she was is because like they really liked Sigourney Weaver's look, but the character of Ripley was written as a man originally in the original Alien script, and they just offered the role to Sigourney Weaver, which, you know, in and of itself is, you know, a little bit, you know, revolutionary. But like, it's when Cameron takes over Aliens and he's like, yeah, you know, the one thing I do like about Cameron is he's like, let's see how do we ramp this, you know, up like 10 years, 20 years down the line? How do we like show how the natural evolution of like what would happen in a circumstance like this? So like in Alien, you know, they just stumble upon it and basically get slaughtered. In Aliens, like, they're like, oh, we know what this is. We're going to send in the military, you know, and they're going to like do their thing, and we're going to get a sample, and it's going to be fucking amazing. And you know, you're just like, oh, well, how does that really turn out? Same sort of thing with Terminator, you know, like Terminator, she's same thing, you know, it's basically just a horror movie and she's the one that survives. Whereas in T2, she is like a bad motherfucker, and like, you better not cross Sarah Connor, because you're going to come out on the wrong end of that situation there. And, you know, so Cameron over and over and over again has like put strong women in his movies. I mean, even Titanic, you know, that's like the most 14-year-old girl movie ever made. And like, and Kate Winslet goes from like being like that, one of those like British actresses that we have a lot of respect for, to like being a fucking superstar, you know? And like that again is like James Cameron, you know, because he could have made just a movie about the boat going down, and like, I'm sure it would have been technically fine. You know, that's my favorite part of Titanic, is when the boat starts sinking, because I'm like, yeah, let's see what you can do with like the boat sinking. But like, the reason that it made bajillions of dollars is because My Heart Will Go On, you know? So
I'm interested to see, kind of like you pointed out, I'm interested to see exactly what effect this movie has. You know, as far as, I'm hoping it doesn't go down like Genesis, Terminator 3, and then whatever, I can't remember which one that Christian Bale was in, but it was all the future. And none of those movies really resonated. You had a couple of cool action scenes, but there wasn't anything memorable like the I'll Be Back scene, or the minigun, the jumping from the pickup truck into the semi and just unloading into the T-1000. There's nothing like that in those other films. So I'm waiting to see, you know, what's going to happen here. You got Linda Hamilton back. You know, she was presumed dead in the third one. You know, so I guess we're dealing with different timelines, or maybe it's going to be, hey, I faked my death and abandoned my kid.
I'm awesome.
Yeah. So, you know, or if it's kind of like,
he needed it in order to become the strong person that he was gonna be.
Well, then you did not see Terminator 3, because he was yeah. Because it was actually his wife. Well, you know what's funny is the third one, they picked up with that because the Terminators weren't coming to kill John Connor anymore. They were coming to kill his wife, or his future wife, which was Claire Danes, because she was the one who was actually organizing and getting everybody ready to fight the Terminators. So, you know, they kind of lead into that. But I'm wondering exactly what's going to be memorable about this film. now that you're going to have, and I'm just going to say 3 female leads, and because I'm not including Arnold in this, because I'm looking at the 3 women that are leading this, 3 different ages or 3 different generations being represented. There are all types of ways that you can head into a discussion about that, but it's really going to require us actually seeing the movie, because I'm looking at it as, are we talking about generational feminism and things changing? Are we looking at the way that women have actually been the backbone of a lot of movements, a lot of social movements, and now it's kind of like, hey, Sarah Connor was the backbone of this resistance way back in the 1980s, and now we're building more resistance to the Terminators that are there. And really, Arnold's character in the second film was just kind of a bodyguard.
Mm-hmm.
She ends up killing the Terminator.
Right.
I mean, well, she ends up killing the Terminator in the first one.
Right.
And then that secures her place as kind of the mother of this resistance. So now I guess it wouldn't be too far off to say that she would be the grandmother of the resistance, because, if we're looking at 1980s, she had John, or she had another child, that kid would be old enough, or that adult now would be old enough to have a child of 10, 15 years of age. But yeah, it's there's so much to get into with that film, but I guess we need to go back into technology, or at least some of the interesting things that I'm going to go out on a limb here and say maybe Skynet isn't a bad thing because of the way humanity is, and not necessarily saying we should have an extinction level event for humanity.
I might say that.
Some humanity.
Pockets of humanity.
Yes. But if you look at, the things that should be automated, we're kind of going in that direction. As far as the human piece would be the programming, and sometimes the manufacture,
right?
Manufacturing the ideas that are being brought forth. And so in T2, Sarah Connor makes that comment to Miles Dyson saying, "Oh, you guys, it's not the person who pulls the trigger or explodes the bomb or whatever. It's the guy who comes up with the idea. Mm-hmm. You guys are the monsters, not the ones who actually do it." Now, I'm paraphrasing exactly where she was going with that. And so that's why I always go to a comparison with Frankenstein for this film series, or at least the first 2 films. But think about things like nuclear weapons. Do we really want those in the hands, or at least being controlled by human beings, when some of us can't even be trusted with a phone to stay off of Twitter?
Right.
I feel like this is a veiled reference at someone in particular.
No, I'm just saying anybody. It could be anybody. But the idea that so many of us are quick to, make a comment or retweet something or share misinformation, whereas only if the programming is flawed, typically the programming is flawed, is a computer going to do something wrong.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, well, if you program the computer to not do something, it's not going to do it. But what we have with Skynet is the programming says, hey, if there's an attack on us, you got to retaliate. It's mutually assured destruction all over again. But Skynet learns and figures, well, you're trying to kill me, so I have to defend myself and defend the world by getting rid of humanity. So, I mean, it's really one of those things that if human beings basically said, we're not going to screw with Skynet, you got this, it's cool, would Skynet have actually destroyed everything?
I don't know.
Because it was when they tried to take it offline is when it attacked.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I guess really at this point, like the whole idea of taking it offline, is sort of like an antiquated, quaint idea that hasn't really aged very well. Let's just take it offline. Okay, well, yeah, okay. Go ahead and try that. Let's see what happens. See if you can actually take something offline. It's one of those things where like what we thought the fail safe is like not even really there. It's like immaterial and nobody really gives a shit about it or whatever. Certainly not on the programming side, but like, I don't think that, so in terms of like, cause I think Skynet kind of is sort of a thing, but like not in the way that it sort of became in this movie, it's more of like artificial intelligence using, its learning capabilities to like automate the automation is more along the lines of what, really is happening. And like, it's been sort of humanity's failure to be nimble as a species, which isn't something that we've been great at as a species. Like just think of all the technological things that have, just like it used to be like, oh man, if we had like a big technological innovation every 10 years, that's fucking awesome, right? That's amazing. And it's really like pushing humanity forward. And now it's like, there are innovations happening right now, this very second, that I don't even fucking know about, that and that I don't even understand, and so like that's where we sort of lack the flexibility, is like our ability to be on top of those sorts of things. And I think that is sort of where the technology aspect of it is going to come into play. And I think it's a much more likely scenario, like Black Mirror is a much more likely scenario to me than Judgment Day, like subtle things that sort of like, affect you in ways that you hadn't really anticipated or could even anticipate, versus like everybody die. It's everybody die is more fun, in a movie, like the sequence of like Judgment Day actually happening. And like, I mean, how many memes were born off of that one skeleton holding on to the fucking chain link fence in Judgment Day, Yeah. It's like, and like now I have to see that fucking thing, every goddamn summer when it's like me at 115 degrees when I walk outside, it's just like, okay, well that, get a little funnier with your memes or whatever. But like, and it had this unintended life that we would have never even anticipated, even for 20 fucking years or whatever it was that movie sat around before somebody finally goes, if I took this screen cap and slapped a couple of words on it, I'll bet that should be funny, So like, I don't know. I don't think that they can I don't think the opportunities to see like big overarching changes are going to really present themselves as readily in science fiction. I think it's going to be more subtle stuff going forward. So like the ideas of like Judgment Day and that sort of stuff where it's just like takes over, all of the nuclear devices and blows them all up, or takes over the CDC and releases like all of the most vile, disgusting, viruses to man or whatever. How, like that, I just I don't know how plausible that is. I'm much more worried about the hubris of man than I am about like Judgment Day actually happening.
That's exactly what I was about to say. I feel like if there's a nuclear launch, it will be because of humans. And it will either be A, somebody with their tiny penis can't handle other people and so they launch, or it'll be B, we let this stuff sit for so fucking long, something just goes wrong.
Right.
I truly believe that the first nuclear attack on American soil will be just a disaster. It won't be an actual launch. It'll be that we've had these things sitting there for this long. We've done these things where we were trying to take care of it and we either were negligent or it just became too much. And in that way, I think that technology will fuck us. But I don't think it's technology's fault. I think it's how humans use it.
I mean, look at Japan, and like what happened to the nuclear reactors when they had an event that was out of their control. Like they're like, oh, well, we're good for like all these things. And they're like, well, what if like the whole country just shakes for like 24 hours and we smash it with water over and over and over again? Like, is that part of your contingency plan? Because apparently it was not, and so like, and you're right there by the ocean, like in how much of the Japanese economy is, pulled out of the ocean, like tons and tons and tons, so like, again, hubris of man, of just like, it's fine to put this nuclear reactor 5 minutes from the ocean. It's fine. Nothing can possibly go wrong.
Well, even in, I think it was 1962, one of our nuclear weapon sites mistook a bear that was walking as a threat and almost launched. And humans had to quickly stop this launch. And I'll look at the details and I'll edit it in here in a bit. But that's so fascinating to me that it goes back to the garbage in, garbage out programming rule.
Yeah, it only does what we tell it to do.
Yeah, we should have a safety button for that, so to speak. And thank God we did, but there should have been a better one in there. But that's what I think will happen. I think if we have a massive destruction, it will be the result of humans either through negligence or through anger. And so in that way, technology doesn't scare me. It's how humans use technology that scares me. Look at how many people die taking selfies, or how many people were injured when Pokemon Go dropped. You know, like, it's people not using technology correctly that's the issue.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, it sort of goes back to, like, you know, the people that were working on, like, the Manhattan Project and not realizing that it could have been used, you know, like, as a weapon, you know, like Oppenheimer going, oh, I can split the atom, you know, and it's like, great, we can blow some shit up with that. And he's like, whoa, wait, whoa, why are we blowing shit up? You know, I'm like, I'm trying to, you know, show you that science is great. And it's like, science is great. It can let us blow things up far away, kill lots of people. We don't even have to have troops on the ground. It's amazing.
If we could prove that there was life on other planets, we would start traveling in an instant to start wars with them and take their resources.
Probably not that. That's a more realistic scenario to me than Judgment Day as well. So,
I do want to say John Connor and Arnold are talking at one point, and Arnold looks at him and says, "It's in your nature to destroy yourselves." Mm-hmm. And I find that fascinating because the entire point of the movie is you guys keep surviving and we need to destroy you. But he's started to understand humans so much that he sees that. And I can't help but wonder if the other machines grasp that or if it's just him. But I think that really plays into what we're talking about here, because we do take science that could be helping people, or take science that could help us travel through space, or take science that can help us do all these things. And instead we just want to blow shit up. Because that's our nature. We do want to just destroy ourselves.
Well, I want to thank Brian Haas for being on the show with us today. It was a very insightful discussion, very fun. Got to talk about one of my favorite movies of all time. Brian, where can people reach you on all the... Oh, great. Now we're going to have a discussion about technology again.
Technology.
And all the ways of social media and all the ways that people can stalk you.
yes, exactly.
They can check out the webcam I have in his house at any time.
Yeah, I need to find out what the IP address is for that and take care of that, obviously. So we're BS Movies on Facebook. I am at BS Movies Podcast on Twitter. Shelley is at Shelley BS Movies Podcast on Twitter. We're BS Movies on the Instagrams. I got to be better at social media. I got to get something going on that Instagram on a more regular basis. And then you can subscribe at iTunes, Google Play. We're on Spotify, Stitcher. I mean, people, like, somebody was like, oh, I listened to you on Pocket Cast. I'm like, awesome. I don't know how we got on there, but we're there too, I guess. So I think people just pick up the feeds or whatever. But yeah, I mean, we're out there. So if you want to give us a listen, we would certainly appreciate that.
Fantastic. And I highly recommend it. I've really enjoyed your show. I definitely haven't heard every episode, but the ones I have been really engaging and entertaining, and I love
Thanks.
them.
And there's probably something for everybody. So, like, if horror's not like your total bag, go look. I mean, we talk directors, actors, genres, weird. I mean, talked about Mountain of Cocaine movies earlier. We go out there on the limb sometimes. Tropes we're tired of seeing, you know, all sorts of stuff. So
awesome. And this coming week on Friday the 13th, I will be at Anime Fargo in Fargo, North Dakota. So if you want to swing by, I am just there on Friday. We have a panel on horror as social commentary.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate that.
No, thanks for coming.
Absolutely. We loved it. So, as always, I am James Sabata.
And I am Don Guillory.
And we look forward to seeing you next week here on the Necronama.com.